In November 1974, a British aristocrat vanished after a night that left one woman dead and another fighting for her life. There was no arrest, no trial, and no body. The man at the center of the investigation was a peer of the realm, educated at Eton, a former army officer and a member of Britain's hereditary elite. His name was Richard John Bingham, the 7th Earl of Lucan. Nearly 50 years later, his disappearance remains one of the most enduring unsolved cases in British history. This is not a story of rumor or legend. It is a story of evidence, timelines, and unanswered questions. Richard John Bingham was born in 1934 into one of Britain's most established aristocratic families. Educated at Eton and commissioned into the Coldstream Guards, Lucan appeared destined for a conventional life of privilege and duty. But by the 1960s, his path diverged. Lucan became a professional gambler, frequenting London's most exclusive clubs. His financial position deteriorated steadily. Losses mounted. Debts followed. In 1963, he married Veronica Duncan, a wealthy heiress. The marriage quickly became strained. By the early 1970s, it had collapsed into open hostility. At the center of the conflict were money, control, and custody of their 3 children. In January 1973, Lucan moved out of the family home at 46 Lower Belgrave Street to a nearby property, and the couple formally separated. A bitter custody battle followed, one Lucan ultimately lost. Although no longer living in the house, Lucan remained in proximity, familiar with the property, and deeply entangled in the dispute. The situation was volatile. On the evening of 7 November 1974, the Lucan household followed a familiar routine. The children were put to bed. Their nanny, Sandra Rivet, went downstairs to prepare tea in the basement kitchen. She never returned. Later that evening, Veronica Lucan descended the basement stairs. What she encountered, she would later tell police, was a violent attack. She reported being struck repeatedly by a man she believed to be her husband. Bleeding heavily, she escaped the house and ran into the nearby Plumber's Arms pub, screaming for help. Witnesses described her as hysterical, soaked in blood, barely able to stand. Police were called immediately. Inside the Belgravia townhouse, police made a grim discovery. Sandra Rivet's body was found in the basement, wrapped inside a canvas sack. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. Nearby, investigators recovered a length of lead piping, later believed to be the weapon. There were no signs of forced entry, and crucially, Lord Lucan was not there. From the moment police arrived, the case was no longer just a homicide investigation. It had become a disappearance. In the early hours of the morning, Lucan appeared at the home of a friend in Sussex. He told a carefully constructed story, claiming he had interrupted an attack on his wife by an unknown intruder and panicked when he realized how the evidence would appear. He told the friend he intended to lie low. It was the last confirmed sighting of Lord Lucan. Later that day, a borrowed car was found abandoned at Newhaven, near the English Channel. Inside the vehicle were bloodstains and a section of lead piping. After that point, Lucan vanished completely. In June 1975, a coroner's inquest examined the evidence surrounding the death of Sandra Rivet. Medical testimony confirmed that Rivet had died from injuries consistent with a blunt instrument, matching the weapon recovered from the scene. After hearing the evidence, the jury concluded that Lord Lucan was responsible for her murder. It was an extraordinary finding, the first time in more than 2 centuries that a member of the House of Lords had been formally named as a murderer by an inquest jury. The conclusion cemented Lucan's role in Rivet's death in the eyes of the law, but without his presence, justice could not proceed. Lucan was never tried. He was never convicted. His disappearance left the case in a state of legal limbo, a murder formally attributed to a peer of the realm, but never prosecuted.
Over the following decades, hundreds of alleged sightings were reported across Africa, Australia, Asia, and Europe. Each was investigated. None were confirmed. Some believed Lucan had taken his own life shortly after disappearing. Others argued he had been assisted in escaping the country. Despite years of investigation, no physical evidence ever emerged to prove either theory. Belief persisted. Proof did not.
In 1999, Lord Lucan was declared legally dead under British law. However, without a formal death certificate, his son, George Bingham, was unable to inherit the family title. That impasse remained until 2016, when the High Court issued a certificate of death, more than 40 years after Lucan vanished, allowing Bingham to become the 8th Earl of Lucan. Legally, the matter was finally closed. Historically, it was not. Despite advances in forensic science, renewed reviews, and modern DNA testing, no evidence has ever emerged to establish whether Lucan died shortly after his disappearance or escaped abroad under an assumed identity. There was no body, no remains, and no definitive proof of how his story ended. For that reason, Lord Lucan's disappearance remains one of Britain's most enduring, unresolved cases, a mystery that continues to capture public attention decades later.
The Lord Lucan case endures because it exposes uncomfortable truths about justice, power, and uncertainty. It shows how wealth and status can complicate legal processes, shaping not only access and opportunity, but also how a case is remembered. It demonstrates that evidence can point in a clear direction and still fail to deliver closure. And it reminds us that some mysteries persist not because they are inherently unsolvable, but because critical moments passed without resolution. By the end of the 20th century, the law sought finality. In 1999, Lucan was declared legally dead. In 2016, the High Court issued a formal death certificate, allowing his son, George Bingham, to inherit the title of Earl of Lucan. Legally, the case was settled. Historically, it remained unresolved. Over the decades, hundreds of alleged sightings were reported across Africa, Australia, Asia, and Europe. Each was examined. None were confirmed. Modern forensic reviews and DNA testing eliminated several purported identities. No physical evidence has ever substantiated either prevailing explanation, that Lucan took his own life near New Haven, or that he successfully escaped abroad. In 2024, marking the 50th anniversary of the murder, the case was revisited in new documentaries and press investigations. Sandra Rivet's son, Neil Berryman, renewed calls for recognition of his mother's life, arguing that public fascination with Lucan had too often eclipsed the victim at the center of the case. Once again, claims were re-examined. Once again, no proof emerged. The anniversary served as a reminder that even in an era of advanced forensic science, some cases remain unresolved, not for lack of attention, but for lack of evidence. Lord Lucan remains officially dead, but the questions surrounding him have never been conclusively answered. Based solely on the documented evidence, several possibilities remain. Did Lord Lucan take his own life shortly after abandoning his car, leaving no remains behind?
Was he assisted in leaving the country, living out his life under an assumed identity? Or does the truth lie in a narrower window, shaped by panic, miscalculation, and events that were never fully observed? History offers no final verdict. What survives is the record, testimony given, evidence preserved, conclusions drawn, and the silences in between. Based only on what can be proven, what conclusion would you reach? Tell us in the comments section. If you value careful investigation, documented evidence, and thoughtful discussion, subscribe to this channel. Share this documentary with others who believe real cases deserve serious examination, not speculation. And if this story made you pause, consider leaving a like. It helps keep long-form investigative documentaries like this alive. History doesn't fade, it waits.